Good morning to everyone.
Okay.
Yes, can you hear me? Okay. Let's get started. Good morning. I'm Kenta Motsuki, a Japanese representative member of the IGF mark in Yahoo Japan Corporation. Today, we would like to hold our main session on digital economy, titled Digital Transformation. How do we shape its socio-economic and labor impacts for good? This is a joint session of the host country and business sector community. And as written in our main session template, this session aims to facilitate a thoughtful dialogue on the process of digitization and digital transformation, while examining its effect on the global value chain, new business models, and the future workforce. Digital economy has been growing and flourishing drastically with the pervasiveness of ICTs such as AI, IoT, big data analytics, or any other emerging technologies. Now that digital economy is economy as such, it has unprecedented potential for innovation and economic growth in both developing and developed countries, as well as for changing the traditional ecosystem of the world economy. Under such situation, the value of data has been reassessed, and no one can deny the cliché, data is the new oil. Here, we have to think about how we can boom digital economy further so that it positively and effectively affects global digital production, commerce, and development. On the other hand, as the leaders of both G7 and the G20 recognize accurately, while digitalization contributes to the innovation and economic growth, at the same time, it presents us with challenges regarding skills, social protection, and job quality, and significantly changing the future of work. For the further development of digital economy, we, together with the multi-stakeholders from all over the world, have to face these challenges and deliberate how we can address these challenges to strike an optimal balance between human capital and ICT-based digitalization and automation, while taking into account the political, social, economic, and cultural situation of each country. In this time slot, we hold two separate but closely related debate-style sessions for a total 3 hours with distinguished high-level speakers as well as prominent moderators. Because we have already uploaded a list of moderators and speakers, in which you can see everyone's short bio. For my part, I'd like to skip moderators and speakers' introduction. The title of part 1 is Digitalization, Global Production, and Flows of Digital Commerce. And part 2 is Digitalization, Automation, and Employment Issues. We definitely have a Q&A session in each part. So we hope you will enjoy both panel discussion as well as the Q&A session during each part. Finally, I'd like to mention about 2 points. First, on 8 December, in relation to the 11th WTO Ministerial Conference, LC11, held in Argentina, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Japan, Taro Kono, announced that the government of Japan is prepared to provide approximately $370 million in the current exchange rate from Japanese yen to US dollars over the next 3 years as support for the ICT field, including e-commerce. His announcement is twofold. First, Japan has been leading the e-commerce-related discussions in the WTO based on the policy that Japan, as a champion of free trade, must take on the emerging challenges of international trade. And second, it is expected that the Japan's support will assist developing countries in improving the relevant infrastructure, and that the developing countries, while recognizing the effective utilization of e-commerce, will proactively engage in rulemaking in the field of e-commerce. As Japan was the chair of G7 in 2016, and will be the chair of G20 in 2019, after Argentina's G20 presidency in 2018. I welcome this announcement and look forward to public-private cooperation and collaboration between Japan and other countries in the future, taking into account OECD's Going Digital project launched in this January in Germany too. Second, on 30th December, also in relation to the WTO MC11, 70 WTO member states reaffirmed the importance of global e-commerce and the opportunities it creates for inclusive trade and development, and stated that they will initiate exploratory work together for the future WTO negotiations on trade-related aspects of e-commerce. While I also welcome this joint statement, I strongly hope that e-commerce work in the WTO will be conducted in an open, transparent, and inclusive manner. So because we have limited time, I'd like to leave these opening remarks and move to the part one of this main session. The first moderator, Dr. Yokozawa, please start your session. Thank you.
Thank you, organizer. My name is Maki Yokozawa, and I am coming from Japan, from the private sector. So I do some advisory work to the government and OECD, and also the APEC, and sometimes the UN. So my job here is keep time and introduce my distinguished panelists here, all sitting here. So let's start with introducing our distinguished panelists. On my left, Mr. Gonzalez, Mr. Oscar Gonzalez is from Argentina, and he is an Undersecretary of Regulation and of the ICT Secretariat, Ministry of Modernization. So, and he has a very good skill and experience in the, for example, chairing some of the meetings in the ITU WTTC in this year. So maybe you can add the supplement something I missed. And on my far left, Miss Dr. Fazene Badieri. She is a research associate of the Georgia Institute of Technology, and in that School of Public Policy, and also the executive director of the Internet Governance Project. She has experienced work as the IGF secretariat, and also she has a great role in the non-commercial stakeholder group at ICANN. So as well, you can just add as you wish. And on my right side, Mr. Trevor Fredrickson from UNCTAD. So, and he is a very famous man, and he is doing lots of work in the trade. So you can introduce yourself because I don't have yours. Okay. And my second right, Miss Anki Das. Is that right pronunciation? Thank you for coming. And she is a director of public policy of Facebook in India and South Central Asia. And she was also a MAG member in the past years, and she also has a great role in ITU, and it's a WCIT, and also she has participating in ICC basis, FICCI, and COAE, and USCIB, many associations. And my far right side, Dr. Walid Al-Sakaf, and he is a senior lecturer of the Södertörn University in Stockholm. And he has a work in the World Economic Forum and some other things like the ISOC and many academia-based activities in these public policy issues. So thank you for that. And I have to also introduce 5 very important questions previously indicated for this panel. So this panel is entitled Digitalization, Global Production, and Flows of Digital Commerce. So it automatically means that this is a very good connection with the e-commerce, digital economy, digital trade, and everything we have discussed in this, even in this IGF. So some specific 5 questions has already on your hand. It's on the web. If you don't have that, please visit the website of this session. So the 5 questions are how is the new digital ecosystem different than the traditional ecosystem? This is the number one. Number 2, what is the contribution of the different types of the e-commerce, namely the B2B, or B2C, or B2G? And the third question is, how do emerging technologies, such as the big data, IoT, and AI, affect e-commerce? Okay, that's a very interesting question. And the fourth, how does digitalization enable new business model and encourage entrepreneurship? Okay. And the last question is, what is the role of the international organizations playing in the facilitating discussion of these policies? So these specific 5 questions I will follow one by one. So the first question is how is the new digital economy different from than the traditional one? So I will call any of the panelists who want to be the first to answer this question. So, okay, Turbo.
Good morning, everyone. Very happy to be part of this panel. Thank you to the organizers for inviting UNCTAD to participate. I believe this is a very timely panel, and I must commend the ones that have posed the questions, because they are very much relevant to what we do here in UNCTAD on the question of development dimensions of e-commerce and the digital economy. I think we're seeing a very fast-moving territory now, very rapid growth of e-commerce around the world, including among developing countries. And at the same time, there's a huge e-commerce gap in the world. We see among developed countries, 60 to 80% of people are already using e-commerce to buy goods and services. And if you move to developing countries, even relatively advanced developing economies such as Colombia, Indonesia, Mexico, South Africa, and Thailand, the share is well below 10% of the population. And if you talk about the least developed countries, it's only 1 to 2% at best. So that means that basically 98, 99% of the population in these countries are not engaging in e-commerce. So we're talking about very different worlds here. At the same time, e-commerce is transformational. It creates both opportunities and costs, which means that countries need to prepare both to harness the opportunities and to deal with the challenges. And we see this evolving digital economy raising a number of issues here for governments and for enterprises to deal with. On the one hand, ICTs and digital solutions can allow more enterprises to engage in e-commerce and commerce as general, to raise their productivity and to reach new markets inside and outside their economies. However, the evolving digital economy also creates challenges such as making it very likely that those that are best equipped to take advantage of these opportunities and cope with the transformations are the ones that will see the greatest gains from e-commerce. And those that are less advanced are likely to also see big challenges. And therefore, there is a risk that digitalization will result in widening income inequalities. At the same time, the reliance on digital platforms involves massive network effects and winner-takes-all effects. In terms of global value chains, digitalization influences the organization and structure of production through increased automation, 3D printing, more reliance on e-commerce, and the ability of further fragmentation of the different stages of production. So a key challenge, as we see it, is to ensure that more enterprises in developing countries have the required skills and capabilities to take an active part in these evolving global value chains. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that. Well, that's quite interesting, and that differs. What is the new e-commerce is different from the difference from the traditional commerce system. Or someone else can follow, or including the introduction of yourself. Sorry, we didn't have. I didn't take time for the introduction, but please, Oscar.
Buenos días.
Good morning to one and all. My name is Oscar Gonzalez. I am the Deputy Secretary of Regulation, Undersecretary of Regulation at the ICT Secretariat, and that is in our Ministry of Modernization in Argentina. I've been listening closely to the thoughts that have been expressed. I should like to broaden these concepts a little bit and address additional concepts tied to e-commerce. This is a specific component of digital economy, which is the topic that brings us here today. I think that all of us present here today are aware of the benefits that the digital economy is bringing to our societies. First, there are benefits of the digital economy and the underlying infrastructure. That's the internet. And this has allowed us to make the world smaller. We can reach all corners of the earth with goods and services. Products that used to be traded with physical infrastructure are now sold through internet. And this is the case with 3D printing as well. There is a possibility of trading goods through the internet, and this is on the rise. The incorporation of ICT in the productive processes has allowed for greater efficiencies in production. The appearance of the Internet of Things, or big data, has allowed the different markets to increase their production conditions. They have ever more information for decision making, and this increases the efficiency of the processes. And then there's the consumers. The consumers, through the internet, have a great deal of options and alternatives. They can more freely choose which goods and services they will be purchasing. For all of these aspects, and so that the promises and opportunities and challenges in e-trade and the digital economy can be adopted by all of our countries, there is an aspect that I want to mention, which is that of infrastructure. We just heard about the dangers of increasing the differences of income between countries and even within each one of our countries. That is to say, between different social groups. This is a matter of internet governance and the availability of internet and connectivity. These issues facilitate the possibility of developing the digital economy and e-trade as one component of the digital economy. And this is where developing countries and less developed countries have important challenges that we must overcome. This should be the focus of our efforts in order to ensure that the digital economy does not replicate the problems that we saw in other revolutions or other changes in production. We need to focus on ensuring 100% connectivity for all of our populations. We need to ensure equal opportunity and equal access so that the promise of digital economies can be enjoyed and achieved by all of our inhabitants. And in this, our governments have a great deal to do. We have a great role to play, but so do other sectors. We need policies that incentivize development, that support entrepreneurs, and that facilitates the development of infrastructure. We must have modern regulatory framework that toss down artificial barriers to goods and services and the trade thereof. We need to address the problem of connectivity with strength, creating more demand and more supply. In our country, we are working a great deal in these areas. We have been working with the World Trade Organization and the OECD, as well as the G20. We will be doing so throughout 2018, addressing these topics that I've just mentioned. In the G20, we will be moving ahead with Germany's ideas, and during the presidency of Argentina in the G20, we will be looking at issues of connectivity that I've just also touched on. Lastly, I believe that the digital economy is an opportunity for our countries, and particularly for developing countries. Argentina is included in that group. I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Oscar. That's a great demographics of how the e-commerce is coming. And especially I just impressed by these words like the efficiency and dangers and connectivity, artificial barriers, and your effort in the next year, G20. Okay, thank you very much. So any other one? So Akihi?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and I would like to thank the organizers for giving a place to the private sector to represent its views on this very important topic. I specifically want to represent the South Asian perspective and the South Asian view and talk about how the digital society and digital economy is impacting the creation and enhancement of labor markets. It's also impacting in very substantial ways the participation of women in the economic workforce and in terms of contributing towards production of economic goods and creating economic value for themselves and for their families and their communities. In India itself, we have seen that the major beneficiary of digital trade has been the small and medium sector businesses. India, as many of you would know, has close to 50 million SMEs, which is the second largest number after China. We see the replication of this trend in other neighboring South Asian countries as well. For instance, Bangladesh's economy is dependent on its SME backbone. 90% of economic entities or organizations belong to the SME sector. What this has in turn also done, what digital trade in turn has also done, is that it has catalyzed and fueled the growth of homegrown startups, which are tapping into this environment of e-commerce and increased connectivity in our societies to produce goods and services which have local relevance and have local impact. For example, there are 2-3 examples I would like to cite over here. Last year, the government of India, via a dramatic policy measure, announced a less cash society and demonetized existing currency and introduced new currency in the country. That singular effort itself has led to huge amount of economic activity, growth of many fintech companies, and also helped in shaping behaviors of the country towards a more or less cash society. That has had two levels of impact. One, it has stopped petty corruption or curtailed petty corruption in a very big way in the country. Second, all of us are aware of this nudging model, which governments basically use in terms of shaping and conditioning behaviors to bring about change at scale. And that has also led to a transformation in terms of how people buy and sell. It has also attracted huge amount of investments, venture capital investments, in terms of fueling growth of the startup ecosystem. India itself received to the extent of over 55 billion US dollars in investments, in venture capital investments. A large proportion of that went to e-commerce and also to fintech companies. We've also seen local innovation which is happening in our countries. For example, while the global north benefits from 4G and 5G type of connectivity, countries like India, vast swaths of our population are still on 2G connectivity. And therefore, there is a need for companies, for the private sector to innovate and build services which work efficiently on 2G platforms. The application economy in the country and in these South Asian countries, the private sector has made it a priority, including many global organizations such as the one which I represent, which is Facebook, in terms of taking inspiration from these countries and building applications, making sure that our application works well in a 2G environment, because we also want to make sure that the benefits of digital economy and benefits of digital society is available not only in an advanced environment, but also in an environment which is largely 2G. So in a nutshell, we have seen the net positive outcome of this, both in terms of impacting the arc of innovation within the private sector, also its ability to create more participation and value and goods and services in terms of being a net value creator to other parts of the world. And thirdly, and most importantly, in countries of South Asia, where public safety for women is a very, very big concern in terms of different kinds of crimes which happen against women, which just impact the physical safety of women, whether it's stalking, rape, different forms of sexual harassment. ICT gives an environment for a lot of women to start their businesses from home. There are n number of case studies after case studies which I can go on talking about, where women have used ICT tools to build local businesses and create jobs and value for themselves and their families and their communities. One particular example I do want to share with this audience over here is an inspirational story of this young girl, a very young girl called Chandni. She literally grew up in the slums of Delhi and used to perform magic shows on the street. She's a self-taught Facebook user. When she lost her parents suddenly and had to earn livelihood for herself and for her younger siblings, she essentially started a page on Facebook called Voice of the Slum, which is a precursor for this publication which she's now bringing out, which is called Slum Post. She used the platform and ICT tools to do fundraising, to raise 100,000 Indian rupees, based on which that was her seed capital in terms of starting this publication, and also create a learning center where now she has employed 20 volunteers and 2 teachers to come and teach the slum children. So we think that the net contribution of the ICT environment in terms of linking markets to individuals and also helping them and produce goods and services has been truly transformative in terms of impacting human lives.
Thank you, Anki. Was quite impressive, especially for the some participation of women and safety of women, and also the entrepreneurship of women, and also you have mentioned about the anti-corruption things by the fintech new technology. That's very important. Quite impressive. Thank you for that. So the rest too. Okay. So please. You can include your
Yes.
first intervention.
So, Walid Al-Sakaf again. I'd like to tell you a personal story. I come from Yemen. Yemen now is on war. It's been devastated through violence and conflicts that's been given rise to a number of problems in society. Yet we can still see certain businesses thriving. This would not have been possible before. It's because the internet remains connecting the people. It remains online. People remain able to communicate despite the violence that's been taking place. Had there been no internet in Yemen today, we would not have learned about the atrocities that's been happening. And so I'd like to recall on this as a revolution in itself, having something that connects people despite the atrocities and issues and developments that are happening, and the very thing that keeps the world informed about events happening there is the internet that allows us to learn more and remain connected. That being said, I'm here in my capacity as an academic at Stockholm, in Stockholm, where I teach media technology. And one of the interesting quotations that I'd like to say, note by Mr. Kenta Mochizuki, he said earlier that data is without doubt the new oil. I'd say if you look at it from the perspective of pure wealth, pure economy, you can do good things with oil, and you can also buy weapons and destroy nations with oil. You have to refine oil. You cannot use oil directly, which is the case with data. You cannot simply take data and not refine it. And so the problem with many development projects around the world is that there is a lack of ability to analyze and use data properly. And one way in which we address this at Södertörn University is look into the influence or the impact that people working in the field of data analysis can help use data for the development of societies. The recent cases of attacks that have been, let's say, promoted or took advantage of social media have, in fact, shown that the very people who can analyze data and use it against economic development or against prosperity and against freedom can, in fact, leverage data in negative ways. Just as you can use data for the development of, let's say, projects, for accountability, for transparency, you can also use it negatively. I've already heard positive stories, but my reflection here is that we can do more. We need to do more. And the idea here is to reflect on how to encourage developing countries by giving them the tools to hold accountable, for example, cases where there is corruption and there are mismanagements of various resources in each of these countries. I'd say there are some signs of hope, signs of optimism, because developing countries can take the advantage of leapfrogging in some cases, where they do not need to go through the same stages that developed countries have gone through. Look at mobile payments now in many African countries. We were at the African Internet Summit earlier this year, and we've seen how they have inspired many to look into the use of technology for facilitating trade and facilitating payments, not on the level of major corporations, but on the level of regular consumers, people like you and me, who are in need for convenient ways of paying. We are now witnessing perhaps one of the potentially major transformations in payments with the rise of blockchain technology, for example, or distributed ledger technologies. And these might have their challenges, but they also have their opportunities. We also look into the ability of many in developing countries to pursue knowledge and skills through the internet. I have seen many in my home country, Yemen, and also in other countries who simply taught themselves how to manage platforms, how to produce goods, how to sell them. There were cases, I also organized TEDx events, and one of the TEDx speakers in Sana'a in Yemen was a female who produced cakes and sold them, and in fact became rather self-sufficient and fed her family. It's because of the internet. The only issue that stands between them and pursuing their dreams is the skill attainment. That can also be facilitated by the internet. So from this perspective, I'd see that we need to focus first on ensuring that the internet is alive as well. It's connecting the people that are supposed to benefit from it. It also needs, it means that we need to allow them to acquire the skills necessary for them to use these technologies. So I've taken this from a consumer level, not from a major macro corporate level, because I feel strongly that if individuals can attain or their dreams through hard work and by giving the skills necessary, that would actually lead to a more informed and more, let's say, developed society. And in that sense, it would have a bottom-up approach rather than a trickle-down or top-down approach. Thank you.
Thank you. That is quite connected to the previous speaker's Agnew's speech, and very much to do with, but in a very different angle. Very helpful. Thank you for that. And I'm especially interested in you mentioned that there is a bad things in the new oil as a data, and also the leapfrog phenomenon. It's very, very important. Thank you. So our last speaker. Okay.
Thank you. Farzan Abadi speaking. So I hear that we need to have access to the internet and there should be internet penetration for better digital economy, but what I do not hear much is about access to other infrastructure, digital infrastructure, such as online payment. And when we look at various barriers in access to digital economy, or what facilitates digital economy, we have to see that we have been imposing archaic laws to the digital economy and to the digital market for the past 20 years. And we have not updated those on the international level. And unfortunately, we see a lot of development. It's great, but in the cross-border online trade of goods, we are lagging behind. We have there is a lot of local trade of online goods, but unfortunately, when it comes to cross-border trade of goods, we do not see that much development. So. It's great that we have the digital economy and have access, and we can provide access to it, but we also need to look at how we can update our international efforts in order to remove the barriers. The other thing is that when we look at developing countries, some of the developing countries are the major suppliers nowadays in the world, and what the digital economy has. The digital platforms have given them the opportunity to, and the access to markets. What we need to provide for them is better digital infrastructure and less regulation, and not impose traditional laws to these platforms in order for them to flourish. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we are almost done about the first question, but it is the time for the interactions from each other's view. So, Turban?
Happy to build on some of the comments, especially the last intervention here. I think it's a very important point that while having affordable connectivity access is absolutely fundamental to participating in the digital economy, it's far from sufficient. And that is one of the big challenges for policymakers, that you have to address a range of policy areas more or less simultaneously, holistically. And this also means that we need, as the world community as a whole, really to rise to the challenge of providing more assistance to developing countries in a range of areas. We see that the readiness of countries to harness these digital technologies and to cope with the transformations will influence each and every one of the sustainable development goals. So this is not a purely economic issue. It really has implications for the whole development agenda. On talking about the platforms, yes, we think that access to digital e-commerce, payment, other platforms can really help micro and small firms to internationalize faster, to access more markets, and so on. But there are a few challenges also here. One is that all developing countries don't have equal access to the global platforms that we often refer to. And it's important to understand why that is the case, what can be done about it. The other thing is that e-commerce as such does not do away with all the barriers to trade. You still need to be, enterprises still need to produce goods and services that are competitive in the market. And if you have substandard goods and services and you put them online, they don't become competitive as a result of that. So we think that the chances for small and micro enterprises from developing countries to take advantage of various platforms is those that are treating a special niche or that offer something unique to the markets. And indeed, maybe in the first stage, the biggest opportunities for especially low-income countries and perhaps middle-income countries for use of platforms for e-commerce may actually be in the domestic market. So just for that, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Torben. This is not the moderator's job, but if may add something that I think from the business perspective, it is very important to think about the sustainability of the sustainable activities. So for the companies like the platformers, so they want to be sustainable and they want to give some stable services to the developing countries as well. So that's something I want to highlight. Sorry about that. So any other interactions for the first question, which is mainly the difference between the new e-commerce and the traditional e-commerce. If not, we will go into the second question. All right. So the second question is what are the contribution of the different types of the e-commerce? So we may think about the B2B and B2C and B2G or C2C, anything. So anyone want to be the first to answer this question? All right. Okay. Yeah.
Maybe I can just start and give you the numbers that UNCTAD has produced. Some, for those that are interested, I've left a number of the Information Economy Report 2017 that captures many of these numbers that I'm citing here for those that are interested. So we estimate at UNCTAD that the global value of e-commerce sales in 2015 was about $25 trillion. Of which about 90% is business to business, and only 10% is business to consumer, consumer to consumer. We also see that the top 10 markets include China, which is actually the world's largest business to consumer e-commerce market, whereas the US is by far the biggest B2B e-commerce market. But otherwise, there are only OECD countries among the top 10 list. So it's still a fairly concentrated phenomenon to developed countries, but it's growing very fast also in developing regions. And another observation that perhaps I can make is that so far most e-commerce is domestic in nature, even in developed countries. You look at the few countries that produce statistics in this area, such as Spain and Canada, about 80% is domestic. 15% in the Canada's case is trade with the US and 5% with the rest of the world. And in Spain it's similar, it's 80% domestic, 15% to the rest of the EU and 5% to the rest of the world.
Thank you for the very good numbers, and that will help us think. And any other? Okay.
Yeah, I think this is consistent trend, what you've talked about. The first phase of the e-commerce organization will be local in scope. We've seen that across countries. In South Asia also, this is a similar trend. And also, this is an early start in terms of how these markets are developing, both organization of labor as well as this as a mechanism in terms of trading. I think 2-3 years down the line, you will see much more maturation as both investments in these companies as well as the startup ecosystem maturity of that, the number of firms which cater to unique requirements, I think will also bring a level of competition via more players. Local relevance will be a net net contributor, will be a net contributor in terms of development of the trade basket. But I agree that the focus in the initial phase, in the first phase, will really be domestic markets and cater to local relevance, and it is only later that it'll get into cross-border trade flows. And this is consistent what we are seeing across the board.
Thank you. Okay, please.
Just a very short comment. I believe the cross-border digital trade has not flourished because, for example, when you look at the customs procedures, they have not been updated to actually accommodate the flow of goods that can be traded online. And they're of a high volume, and if the customs procedure is not easy, then it's not really worth it to have cross-border trade for the businesses and the consumers. And when we look at WTO only took a step to facilitate and make the customs procedure easier last year. So we've waited quite a long time to update these laws.
Thank you. That will remind me the new initiative and the last week in Buenos Aires about the WTO's e-commerce initiative. So, okay, thank you very much. So, Oscar.
Las estadísticas que nos comentaban muestran un poco el...
So we were talking about the problem earlier, inequality in the possibility of accessing the new forms of trade and the new forms of production that arise with new technology. An important aspect of e-trade is the incorporation of, or the inclusion of, the small and medium-sized enterprises. Beyond the issue of cross-border trade, I think that on the country level, the inclusion of small and medium-sized enterprise into new production processes so that they can broaden what they offer to the markets, I think that in socioeconomic terms, this is an important issue, and they have a great deal of contribution to make. As regards cross-border trade, I don't think we should all punish ourselves for the pace of change. These are new processes that we are facing. These are new challenges. And we do need a broad consensus between and among countries and between and among all of our realities. I do want to offer a voice of optimism. I think that slowly but surely we will be able to make progress moving toward consensus on how to address e-trade and cross-border e-trade. This will be important beyond WTO agreements and beyond trade agreements in other bodies. It will still be important to resolve the issues of cross-border data, privacy, data security. Then, eventually, the decisions that can be made around trade will have a strong scaffolding, if you will. Thank you.
Thank you, Oscar. Yes, and at the same time, we will have to think about some negative aspect of the e-commerce, like the privacy protection and security. Yes, I agree with that. So, yes.
Walid, again, just to add to that, it appears to me from looking at the discussion outcomes that there is, and over the years, a concentration of monopoly of information, of data among the businesses, among the corporations to understand where the deals are made, how they are made. I mean, this might be a hypothesis, but it looks like that. Or maybe looking at, I don't know how many of you have seen the movie, 2016 movie War Dogs. You remember how the main actors have seen that revealing information about certain deals that are out there made them first to apply and get, the bids out and eventually win and then move on to amass wealth. So I don't see that much of difference. Is that if data is not available to smaller and medium-sized enterprises in various countries, if they are not empowered to understand how to reach that information, how to gain access, how to analyze, how to improve their competitive advantage, then they will always be back in the race. It's as if you have a marathon, and then the ones in front are always with the best Nike shoes, with the best clothes, with the best training, that go to the best gyms. Then we'll never be able to compete unless there is a way for them to acquire the same skills, acquire the same advantages. They they will always be at a disadvantage.
Thank you so much. Good point. I think the digitalization is naturally have the aspect of the concentration of data and the scale merit of then that we can have just some cost down, risk mitigation and everything. So I think it is the nature of the digitalization and the e-commerce. But yes, we have to think about how the monopoly issues and the other negative aspect of the digitalization or e-commerce. Yes, I agree with that. So this well leads to the next question. Number 3 is how the emerging technologies, not limited to this, but the IoT, AI, and e-commerce, will affect and what is the problem regarding to this? So anyone want to be the first to answer this question, or you can continue your intervention.
Maybe I would like to start with a proposal or an initiative that I've heard recently, an entrepreneurial incubator in Somalia. You know, Somalia has come out of a long civil war that's really devastated the country for a very long time. And since then, they've been trying, after they emerged, they've been trying to rebuild. And rebuilding meant that they will need support from international development agencies, from partners who are willing to invest there. And so one of the main problems they face, according to him, is a lack of accountability and transparency. What happens is that there's so much money and so much funding happening that leads eventually to the country not being able to absorb efficiently and leads to leaks and corruption. So what happens here is that, linking back to the question, the technologies that are available today would allow to minimize corruption if they are used effectively. So one example is the use of blockchain technology. Blockchain is one way in which you can transparently and effectively or immutably store data and ensure that from the very first transaction to the very end, everything is being kept securely and in a way that will not be tamper-proof. It will be tamper-proof. So it meant that if there are flows of funds and income coming into the country, that would be held in a way that would make it difficult for corruption to flourish. So these types of technologies can help developing countries if they are used effectively, and if there is a political will by the entities involved in the government and as well as the international organizations, including the private sector, to leverage these technologies for better, both improving the economy that would help eventually lead to better e-commerce and have a fertile ground for economic prosperity.
Thank you, Wally. Anki, you just mentioned about something similar to the anti-corruption with the fintech. So is there anything to add? Or?
I think there has always been this, and there has been conversation and there has been this concern about the impacts of automation on employment or creating unemployment, right? Like, this is a question which has been there before societies, before governments, policymakers, all constituents who engage on this question. And this is a simplistic view of it, but I would still go ahead and say it. To equate artificial intelligence to a form of automation which will lead to unemployment is perhaps a very high form of fear-mongering, I would argue. because we have seen progressively with the introduction, this is no different from the introduction of the steam engine or other forms of automation which came with the first phase of the Industrial Revolution. I think what that does mean for societies is that there needs to be a massive reorientation of the skilling agenda. What is the skilling agenda given our youth demographic across the world which we have? What should be the national strategy in terms of looking at that? How do we look at policy measures, not just which are just tech focused, like when India did its demonetization and sort of linked it with a big push in terms of a less cash society. This was a structural reform in the country. It was an attack on something which has been prevalent in the country since our independence movement, which is how do you deal with big ticket corruption and also with petty corruption on a day-to-day level which people have to deal with and go through. How do you make sure that you're creating an environment, a better environment, where public services delivery is more accountable, it is in time, and people get what they're supposed to get. The entire transparency element in terms of devolution of benefits through the direct benefits transfer proposition, which again is now being delivered through a digital platform, which is why we have the National ID program, which is Aadhaar, in terms of delivering services. These are fundamental strategies which countries will have to look at, and technology will be an input factor into that. I think it's very important for all of us to understand that there cannot be over-centrism in terms of looking at technology being the silver bullet which will go and solve all the problems, but essentially look at the application of that in different scenarios. So therefore, I do believe that how we think of AI in terms of bringing more efficiencies, whether it is in the trade domain, e-commerce domain, or looking at other areas such as healthcare, like our countries have massive population and there's such a demand-supply gap in terms of delivery of healthcare. Could AI be used to design efficient healthcare systems so that people can focus more be more aware and focus more on the preventive side and have those facilities? So those are the scenarios I think which will develop over time, and we will have an opportunity to see the real life examples in terms of how the implementation surface.
Okay, thank you. Oh, yes.
Thank you. I'd like to perhaps go back a little bit to some of the remarks that Wade made, and that is you refer in this question to the growing role of big data, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence. And I think what is very uniting for those three is the increased role of data in the digital economy. And as was mentioned, it's not only a question of having access to the data. The perhaps even bigger challenge is to do something with all this data that is being generated. So it puts the focus again on the capabilities of analyzing and transforming whatever analysis you do into business opportunities in the market. And we have heard this reference to the data being the new oil, and I'm not too keen on that parallel for various reasons, but I would definitely agree that data is perhaps one of the most valuable resources that can be extracted, but its nature is so different compared to oil. It's not a finite resource, for instance. And the other thing is that if there is too much supply of oil in the market, then the price of the oil will go down. If there is a lot of supply of data in the market, the value of that data will actually increase. So that is why the big platform corporations, for instance, they thrive on having as much data and as diverse data as possible at their disposal and for their analysis. And there are different ways here for companies to monetize this data. The Google, Facebook approach is to collect data from users, and you can then sell advertising space. And the more data, the more efficient the algorithms are to determine how to use this for advertising. But there are also traditional industries like normal manufacturing companies like Caterpillar or Rolls-Royce or so that are using data from all their production systems to gather intelligence about how things are evolving around the world and they're using this to optimize the whole production chain, production, R&D, sales, supply chain management, and so on and so forth. So what we're seeing is that, and then you have other companies that are thriving on the use of data, like Amazon Web Services that are providing cloud solutions, and they're basically getting money from subscriptions or renting out this kind of capacity. So what I think we're seeing here is that in so many different ways, the ability to take advantage of data is influencing the competitiveness of companies in all sectors. And that raises then issues to data protection, privacy, consumer protection, cybercrime, surveillance, competition policy, and so on. And since we expect that this will just grow very rapidly in the coming years, we have to come back to the question, how do we bring in developing countries in this world?
Thank you for that. Yes, I personally impressed by how big structural change, even in the usage of these advanced technologies, are expected. So, well, okay. So, any other things from the?
Creo que hay un consenso.
I think that there is consensus, significant consensus, around the contributions of these technologies and the efficiencies they bring to production. That's in data and in other areas as well. Based on previous comments, I think it is important also that public policies be aimed at promoting the development of these technologies and that we target the universalization of their use. There is a need for public policies that foster innovation and competition. These policies should also eliminate artificial barriers that regulations and legal frameworks in our countries are established by our countries for new endeavors and for the use of new technologies. I think that's a first aspect that we need to look at. We need to move forward with these new technologies and benefit from their use. Also, I agree with what Madam Das has said regarding the need for training. Our citizens need training when it comes to the use of these new tools in the digital economy. I think that this is a topic that will be addressed in the second part of this discussion. But I do think it's the second most important aspect to bear in mind. So there's the issue of access to the net and to these tools. But secondly, our citizens must have the appropriate skills and knowledge to benefit from these technologies.
Thank you.
So I'm just going to make a short intervention on one of the reasons that that information services flourished on the internet was because of the cross-border data flow. And now we look at IoT and to see the expansion and growth of IoT sector, we need to preserve this cross-border data flow. And unfortunately, we see that countries are going towards data localization and trying to dominate the internet by applying their jurisdiction to data. What we need to do is to, through trade agreements, prevent data localization and facilitate cross-border data flow. Now, we need to also consider that some may not agree with me that trade agreements are the best tool for this, but we have to also consider that the trade agreements could lead to a better privacy protection, even considering that they can the countries can agree to have minimum standard of privacy protection, and this is especially important for IoT growth. And yeah, that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for highlighting my biggest concern, the data localization and privacy protection issues. So, well, I hope we may have time to go back to this issue, but well, we have only 8 minutes scheduled, but so I'm going to do is we have two more questions left, but I will combine these two questions into one, and who can answer to the two of these questions. What is that are the how does digitalization enable a new business model and encourage entrepreneurship? And the last one is what are the roles of the international organizations? So we will combine them, and who will be the first to start any of these two questions? Okay. Okay, so please, what if?
I would start from the last part about international organizations. I would say it's easier. That's okay. I would say that the need is to ensure more equal treatment to all countries and all organizations and all businesses, and to make it clear that any forms of monopoly, fragmentation, localization are not excluding those small and medium-sized businesses, because otherwise the status quo will remain, and this would lead to more of a digital gap between the rich and the poor among these businesses. Additionally, I would say that they should lead by example by being transparent, by opening up their books and showing how efficient they are, how forthcoming in producing data about aid, about various projects, about how they work. And I would say this is done to a large degree, but it can be improved. And this information should be available for data scrutiny, for data analysis by media, by journalists. I, for one, often complain that there are no easy ways to extract data from many international organizations about their work through machine-readable applications, and so through APIs, etc. So this would be very useful, because an informed public can only be achieved if there is informed media, if there are informed journalists. They need to be able to access this information, and it should be dynamic, it should be clear, there should be openness and transparency. And then following on that, they should also be accountable both to their own organizations and to the international community. And I see this as a role model to play, because then if they are accountable, then the various other players would be put on the spot, and they will actually have to comply as well. So these are examples of doing it. And additionally, I'd like to ensure that we continue on exploring new disruptive technologies, seeing how they can play a role, helping developing countries implement case studies of these technologies, using them as test beds for applications that may help them leapfrog in some ways, as long as they have enough protections of security of secure data and having privacy in mind. These are some of the recommendations I can give.
Thank you. We will continue this discussion for the international organizations. Trouble?
Well, representing an international organization, I can give my perspective on this. And I think the international community really has a fundamentally important role to play here. We face a situation where very rapid growth of digital economy, massive digital divide still prevailing around the world, and a very complex policy challenge for governments in developing countries to cope with this. That means that it will be very hard for them to succeed with this in a very successful way without support from the international community in many different areas. And we feel that so far our combined efforts have been totally inadequate in this area. They have been too small, too fragmented, and too inefficient. And it was against that background that UNCTAD took the initiative to set up what we call the E-Trade for All initiative, which is trying to deal with 7 policy areas in parallel, where UNCTAD has only expertise in certain of these, but throughout the international community, international organizations can come in and support in different ways. And we're very happy to have the Internet Society, Consumers International, and some other civil society organizations involved. We have today 27 partners. The latest organization to join was the World Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO. But there is also more than 30 private enterprises that are supporting these efforts to have a dialogue between the private and the public sector. And we have put all the relevant assistance programs that are available from these partners on one platform called etradeforall.org to make it easier for those that need assistance to find assistance from this very diverse, fragmented community in one place. And I would very much encourage you to have a look at that. But I think assistance also need to be combined with better forums or fora for developing countries and developed countries to come together and discuss many of the challenges that are on the agenda. And from UNCTAD's perspective, with only one player here, we offer the e-commerce week that will take place in April this year, and also member states have set up something they call the Intergovernmental Group of Experts on E-commerce and the Digital Economy. And these are both areas where member states can meet with private sector, civil society, other international organizations, and the academic and technical community to foster this area. We need much more dialogue, and we need much more support, and we hope that we can contribute in that. Thank you.
Okay, please, Oscar.
Voy a tratar de comentar.
I will try to respond to both questions to keep our moderator happy. On the first, I think that we have already spoken to that. We have talked about how digitalization helps entrepreneurs. We talked about the possibilities and opportunities that technology offers these small and medium-sized enterprises. On a daily basis, we see new apps and new technology that are only possible because they can be developed through the internet and with new technology. I think that we have addressed that point sufficiently. As regards the international organizations, there are two topics. First, the digital economy, by definition, has a cross-border impact. That's first, and that does give rise to other subsequent questions. But secondly, the digital economy affects a great many other things. It's cross-cutting. We see that this arises in the discussions in many international organizations as they address different aspects of digital economy. We see this in WIPO, UNCTAD, the WTO, etc. Perhaps coordination efforts can be improved. That is certainly possible. But again, I think that we should have an optimistic viewpoint. Each country, with their respective reality, can make contributions in the different fora on data privacy, security issues, purely trade-based issues such as tariff barriers and import rights or quotas. Perhaps we can, as I have said, increase coordination. And we do see efforts to do so. Sometimes there are silos, but increasingly we see a breaking down of the silos, which will lead to an efficiency in the decisions made in international organizations. Again, I think that we are taking an optimistic viewpoint. We are looking at the different aspects of digital economy in all of the different fora. And another aspect that is part and parcel of the digital economy is that there are multiple stakeholders. We cannot fail to recognize that there are actors in the digital economy that are important globally. And in some cases, these are actors that are playing as important of a role as members of the international community. And many of these these realities bring about their own challenges, and this compels us to address matters domestically and between and among countries. And this is essential as we move forward addressing challenges. Thank you.
Oscar, so I want at least 5 minutes for the question and answer of this session. So the two last speakers, please help me to do that. So who is first? Okay. So Anki first. And
So I'll be brief in the interest of time. I think the main points which we heard is that it is very clear that digitization has helped both entrepreneurship development and expansion of markets. And as we all know, in all our countries, jobs are created by entrepreneurs. So therefore, there is broad agreement on that principle. What I think are the outstanding questions are, given that a lot of the activities which happen in the digital economy are borderless, therefore there needs to be a very high focus in terms of harmonization at a principles level, because every country will go and create its own national legislation, and therefore there has to be renewed focus in terms of harmonization, whether it comes to data protection or privacy laws or cybersecurity norms. There is a need to do that, and global organizations, international organizations play a very important role in that. From a global south perspective, what is most important insofar as the work of international organizations is concerned is to make sure that global south has a voice. There's this question of voice, and there's one thing to say that yes, everybody has voice, and it's another thing to demonstrate that everybody actually in effect has voice. And therefore, I would urge the international organizations to strengthen the regional processes. I think the regional and national IGFs are very good mechanisms to make sure that that demonstration is there, that people do in fact have more voice. And I would also request the international organizations to engage a lot more than they currently do in the national and regional IGFs. Those would be my recommendations and submissions to this forum.
Thank you. And Fazani?
Thank you. So a very brief comment. We would like international organizations to cooperate more with civil society. And civil society itself has various projects and has been active in the field of digital trade. We have Electronic Frontier Foundation, for example, that they have been working hard for a long time on transparency of trade negotiations and trade agreements. We also at Internet Governance Project, we have a digital free trade project specifically addressed to civil society to get civil society participate in these digital trade negotiations and pay attention to the issues. So I believe that as well as international organizations' activities, we need more civil society participation and we need more collaboration with these international organizations.
Okay, thank you. So we successfully have 5 minutes for question and answer. So is there any remote participants jumping in? Okay, so also from the in this room, anyone who want to ask or this? Oh, okay. Okay.
Hello, my name is Gonzalo López Barajas. I'm representative of Telefónica, and I will make my comments in Spanish as they are mostly related to the intervention of the Argentinian Secretary of State. Buenos días.
Good morning. I am a representative of Telefónica. And first off, I should like to applaud the remarks from Mr. Gonzalez, the Undersecretary of Regulation. He underscored the key role played by infrastructure and telecommunication networks. This is a crucial part of digitalization and internet. I would like to underscore the relevancy and the importance of fostering policies that further bring about investment in infrastructure and the supply of services. I should also specifically like to mention 3 items that we think are very relevant in Latin America and that could also have a key impact on the further development of internet for all. First, the spectrum. I think that it is essential that there is a broader spectrum available for the operators. This will allow for us to cover existing demand and bring about greater access to internet for all users. Secondly, we believe that it is crucial that we adopt policies on audiovisual services and convergence. The telecommunications operators can thus offer audiovisual services that allow for an increased use of the networks, offering greater services to the users. And lastly, and I think this is even most important, is the issue of taxes. If truly we all agree that internet access is essential to the entirety of our societies, if this is our priority, we cannot be imposing taxes on telecommunications services, both for internet access and for terminals, as if it were a luxury good. Telefonica is contributing to the tax base in some countries with more than 45% of the company's income in some cases. This has a negative impact, and the society will be affected by that. So we call for a review of tax policy. And in a context of globalization, we see greater decentralization, and there is greater pressure put on the operators and the providers as regards the tax burden that is used to finance many of the government's needs. So we believe that this is a crucial aspect that should be addressed. We would like to see this be a central part of the G20 agenda under the Argentine presidency. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I will call only one question from Mr. Parminder, and then answer from the participants and panelists.
Much to the chair and the panelists who gave an excellent presentation. So I heard a lot of talk about the privacy and security related aspects of data, but as we talk economics, one of the big issues is that data is a resource, as Tobjon mentioned. And once you see things as an economic resource, then there are issues of who has the right of economic exploitation of that resource, who owns that resource. And that kind of framework is important because individuals own their personal data and probably the right to exploit economically, socially that data. And as collective ownership, for example, a school may own the data of the students and educational activities in that place, even if the Google machines are collecting data there. District may own the health data of that place. So this collective and individual ownership patterns are not spoken of. And we also know that data to an individual, unlike, say, oil or physical objects, are not valuable as such. An individual is not able to do much about the data if he or she retains it. So there have to be some kind of facilitating means to be able to help them make use of data. And Indian government in this regard, and Anki was talking about many other Indian initiatives, but there is an e-consent framework which allows people to give their data in a public infrastructure of e-consent framework. So the question really relates to whether we should be talking about ownership issues, and what does this mean when huge amount of data gets transferred from developing countries to developed countries as the way the digital trade is taking place now. And as somebody said, it's like oil, though I don't agree that, it's really like oil. But if it's like oil, no country would be liking to give that oil free to the other countries. So what kind of collective ownership of data have to be talking about? What kind of flow of actual resources are taking place? And whether we should be talking about collective and individual ownership of data as well in these talks. Thank you so much.
Well, that is also my consideration as well. So data ownership is very important. And so because of the time restriction, and we call from only one response from Oscar to Lorenzo.
Thank you for your thoughts. I fully agree. I think that it is important for governments to offer greater spectrum, specifically for, or especially for mobile use. And in the case of our country, we have launched a policy aimed at opening up greater spectrum, greater bandwidth for mobile services, at least to make sure that we are meeting the regional averages and following the recommendations of the ITU. This helps the operators develop their networks. I think also, as regards the radioelectric spectrum, I'm thinking of the new apps and new services that we were talking about. I think that we need to develop new and more creative options for the use of the radioelectric spectrums. In some countries, we have seen regulatory decisions that make the spectrum available in a non-authorized manner or in a free use scenario where there is not interference. However, we believe that also when we look at the spectrum, we do need to innovate. It's not just a matter of opening up more spectrum to operators, but we also need to find new ways for using these resources that will allow for the incorporation into the market of new services and new apps so that new technologies can be developed. As regards convergence, obviously, I think that each country has their own processes and modalities and interests, but I don't think anyone is doubting the need to move ahead in the competition of services and networks. The internet has brought about networks, each offering their own services. Each country has their own reality. I don't think that anyone is calling into question the need for convergence. As regards tax policies in each country, in our administration, as we see it, and this does not go only for the telecommunications operators, but also for digital services on the whole, we believe that taxes must have general criteria. We must avoid or try to not bring about specific taxes that bring a burden to one activity and not others. There should be a tax policy that treats different areas of the economy equally. This is relevant for a country such as Argentina with a federal system. We do need to review a great many tax policies on the local level, on the district levels, and on the national level. Again, that's on the tax issue. But I think that those were the 3 points I was wanting to mention. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Does any of the panelists want to respond to the specifically to the Mr. Parvinder's scenes? You? Okay.
I think the main point which everybody will need to grapple with is, as you said rightly, data ownership. Of course, that is one point where there needs to be consensus, and the general view, this general acceptance, is that the individual owns his or her data. I think the main question where we will need discussions, further discussions, and evolution of thought is on the principle of consent. Because data by itself, to enter the digital economy, the basis of that is defining the forms of consent, and also looking at principles of autonomy. So those are the two outstanding points on which there is further debate and discussion is required. And everybody knows that there is a GDPR process which is on here in Europe. India has also constituted a high-powered committee to examine the question of privacy legislation development in the country, and I do expect that other countries will also follow similar processes. But really, I think the main question, which is before all people working in the area of data protection, is to really get their heads around, wrap their heads around in terms of coming together on a consensus on the definition of consensus, of consent.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, I didn't we didn't have enough time, but some of the discussions may be continued to the second panel. So, I am very happy to this distinguished panelists and very good discussions about the e-commerce and digital economy. So, please join me to say thank you to all of the distinguished panelists, and we will keep this discussion. Thank you so much.
Hi. Hi, everyone. This is Renata, one of the MAG members co-organizing this session. Just a heads up that we are restarting the session soon with the second part. Thank you.
We're going to start part 2 of the main session. If possible, please have a seat. And moderators, please start your session. Sorry, thank you.
Hi, good morning. We're going to start now. I want to introduce myself. I am Ms. Paola Perez, Computer Systems Engineer, Vice President of Internet Society Venezuelan Chapter, and Chair of the LACNIC Public Policy Forum. I am based in Venezuela. Also, I want to introduce the other moderator, Ms. Natalia Fodic, who is an attorney specialized in policy regulation of telecom and internet based in Washington, D.C., and also a PhD student. This second part of the session is called Digitization, Automation, and Employment Issues, and we have 6 speakers, 5 questions during 50 minutes. I want to introduce Ms. Ana Cristina Amoroso das Neves, Director of the Department for Information Society, Science and Technology Foundation, IP, Ministry of Science, Technology, and HE, Portugal. Mr. Engineer Hossam El Gamal, Chairman of the Egyptian Cabinet Information and Decision Center, IDSC. Ms. Valentina Esialpi, Policy Officer, Next Generation Internet, DG Connect, European Commission. Mr. Philip Jennings, General Secretary of the UNI Global Union. Mr. Jennings has been described as the labor movement global warrior. Mr. Edmond Chung is working in the DOE Asia Organization Secretariat, Asia Pacific Regional Internet Governance Forum Director, co-chair of the Internet Governance Forum Support Association, ICANN Universal Acceptance Steering Group co-chair, and ICANN IDN Guidelines Working Group. On Ms. Karen Mccabe, Senior Director of Technology Policy and International Affairs of the IEEE. IEEE. And we have the first question that, sorry.
Is it here? Yeah. Good morning, everyone. I'm Natalia Fodic. This session is going to address a really important topic, technology, automation, labor markets. I guess this is a topic that relates to all of us, regardless of profession, status, or geographic location. We hear a lot of statements such as Yuval Harari's, the Israeli author who wrote the book *Sapiens*, for example, that he talks about the rise of the useless class. We hear this sort of statements, but I guess that more important than making predictions such as this one, it's important to understand what lessons can be learned, what ways in which labor markets can be affected by automation, what skills are going to be needed. So these are some of the things we're going to debate here.
What are some of the lessons learned from past market transformation? Agricultural to industrial? Okay. So, sorry, first we're gonna, each of the speakers have 5 minutes to talk. So, who's gonna start? Mr. El Gamal? Okay.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Hossam El Gamal. I'm the chairman of the Information and Decision Support Center of the Egyptian Cabinet. In our capacity, we are responsible for gathering information, analyzing it, and providing decision support to the Cabinet. And accordingly, we have been into many of the challenges and benefits of the digitization and automation area, and this is what we are going to answer in the coming few minutes. The fact is that it's a new era, and as has been said, technology is now at level 4.0, and many of the legislations and preparation are still at the level 2.0. And we need to discuss how we are going to bridge that gap to make sure that we benefit to the optimum of the digitization and the automation phenomena. Thank you.
Next speaker is going to be Ms. Valentina Cialpi, please. No.
No.
Yeah. Yeah, it's working now.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Good morning, everyone. My name is Valentina Cialpi. I work for the European Commission, Directorate General for Content, Network and Communication Technologies. I want to thank the organizer of this session and the fellow speakers here. And I want to say that the impact of digitization and automation of the labor market on the workforce is real, is very real. Ever since the beginning of history, humanity has been shaping technology, but in turn also technology has been shaping human societies. We in Europe has been the birthplace for the first and the second industrial revolution that represented another big wave of automatization of the workforce. And we are trying to positioning Europe to be an important player in the fourth industrial revolution. Oftentimes, disruptive revolution like the one we are experiencing now can be threatening, but together we always overcame the challenge and we improved our daily life. The main difference with the digital revolution is the fast pace and the wide impact global that we are witnessing and experiencing. But we, despite threatening and challenges, we ought to stay optimistic. By working together with a collaborative and constructive approach, we can ensure that digitization and automation will represent an opportunity for all, for socio-economic development and to reduce digital divides and social inequalities. Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks, Valentina. The next is going to be Mr. Jennings, please.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Philip Jennings. I am the General Secretary of Uni Global Union. When I was described on the screen above you and before me, there was a rather large question mark. I can answer that question mark by saying that we represent 900 trade unions in over 150 countries, but as part of the broader global trade union movement with 200 million members. I'd like this conference to conclude and recognize, of course, we are in an age of transformation and age of disruption. I'd like them to adopt the motto, leave no one behind, and to support policies that place people and jobs at center stage with the aim of delivering social justice in the 21st century. At this time, in a fractured world where we see divides economically, socially, and politically, I'd also like to put this age of transformation also in the broader sense of peace and social cohesion. There will be no lasting peace without social justice. And this should also be conditioning the reflections that are taking place about our future. This is way beyond a technical argument and a technical transformation. I'd also like this conference to consider that labor is not a commodity. I'd like you to think of work in terms of the value it presents in itself, that it should provide dignity, that it should offer security, it should provide opportunities for self-fulfillment, and it should be available to everyone, that it should sustain us as individuals and bind us as a society. When we look at the departure point of today's labour market, we see less of the above mentioned. In this world of work today of 3.2 billion, half of them are in vulnerable work. 1/3 of them survive on less than $2 a day. We have 152 million child labourers. We have 40 million working in conditions of what we say modern slavery. We see levels of inequality that we've not seen for a century, and we are seeing practically the largest transfer of wealth from working people, what the Americans would call the middle classes, to the top 1%. This is not a sustainable model. And then on top of this, you put this digital transformation. Job quantity. Now, there's all kinds of figures being thrown out. Not from us. There is the optimistic school saying that basically everything will be all right. But then there seems to be a large, vocal, vociferous, empirical school saying it won't be all right in the night and neither in the daytime. We see occupational changes, labour market segmentation, job polarisation, gaps in social protection, and rights abuses. Just to spice it up a bit, from where I'm sitting, we see economic violence in terms of what this means for distribution and well-being, political violence because the space for civil society and the union movement is closing down, and then we see legal violence with a misclassification of workers who are employed, but because of the interpretation, willful interpretation given by some, are considered to be self-employed workers. What we're about then and what we should be about is about social inclusion. We do need a new kind of a global deal. We need a human-centered model of economic growth. We need to invest in human capital, and there's a whole raft of proposals that we could discuss during the question and answer session. I don't want to make the chairperson and the timekeeper any more agitated by abusing the 4 minutes that I've had, which is, yeah, it's practically 4 minutes. There we are. I'm done. Thank you. There's more to come.
Thank you, Mr. Jennings. We're gonna now is talking Karen Mccabe, please.
Thank you. My name is Karen Mccabe. I'm with the IEEE. It's an honor to join this session, and I thank the organizers for the opportunity. In addressing digital transformation and how we can shape the socioeconomic and labor impact for good, I will speak to this from the perspective of IEEE's Global Initiative for Autonomous and Intelligent Systems in its recently ethically aligned design document, which addresses a spectrum of interrelated challenges ranging from privacy and security, personal data, and individual access control to economic and humanitarian impact, including the impact on the workforce. As the use and impact of technology, including autonomous and intelligent systems, become pervasive, we need to establish societal and policy guidelines in order for such systems to remain human-centric, serving humanity's values and ethical principles. To be able to contribute in a positive, non-dogmatic way, the techno-scientific communities need to participate in an open and honest debate around its set of explicit or implicit values, institutions, symbols, and representations. These systems have to behave in a way that is beneficial to people beyond reaching functional goals and addressing technical problems. This will allow for an elevated level of trust between people and technology that is needed for its fruitful, pervasive use in our daily lives. Digitization in general and autonomous systems specifically provide unique and impactful opportunities in the humanitarian space. As disruptive technologies, they promise to upend multiple historic institutions and corresponding institutional relationships, offering opportunities to intermediate those settings with more humanitarian and equitably focused structures. The value of autonomous systems is significantly associated with the generation of superior and unique insights, many of which could help foster the accomplishment of humanitarian and development goals and to achieve positive socioeconomic outcomes for both developed and developing economies. Among the opportunities for cooperation and collaboration at the intersection of autonomous systems and humanitarian development issues are: autonomous systems have been recognized as key enablers for achieving the goals of humanitarian relief, human rights, and the Sustainable Development Goals. This recognition provides the opportunity to demonstrate the positive and supportive role that autonomous systems and digitization in general can play in these critical areas. These systems are related to, but hold a unique place within the larger ICT for development narrative. This intersection creates opportunities for autonomous systems to be applied in settings where commercial and development agendas meet, and to facilitate advances in the administration and impact assessment of development programs. There's an ongoing narrative on affordable and universal access to communication networks in the internet, which invites consideration on how the implementations and fruits of autonomous systems and digitization in general will be made available to populations. The narrative of autonomous systems for the common good is starting to present itself in various settings. Key elements framing this common good conversation relate to the need for it to be human-centered and include the need for accountability and to ensure that outcomes are fair and inclusive. The scaling and use of autonomous systems represent a genuine opportunity to provide individuals and communities with greater autonomy and choice. Autonomous systems will potentially disrupt all manner of economic, social, and political relationships and interactions, including the labor market. Those disruptions will provide a historical opportunity to reestablish those settings so that they are reflective of more updated and sustainable notions of autonomy and choice. Many of the debates surrounding autonomous systems take place within advanced countries, among individuals benefiting from adequate finances and higher than average living situations. It is imperative that all humans in any condition around the world are considered in the general development and application of these systems to avoid the risks of bias, excessive imbalances, and general non-acceptance of those technologies. In the absence of that comprehensive treatment, autonomous system policy issues will be addressed piecemeal by different jurisdictions and in different sectors. In that context of distributed policymaking, a patchwork of policies and initiatives is likely to result, dissipating potential impact. However, some measure of policy interoperability can be served if there are a common framing of policy generation process for analysis that can be shared across jurisdictions in all sectors. With this, I would like to conclude my remarks, and thank you.
The interpretation service would ask that speeches be delivered at a reasonable speaking pace. Thank you.
Mr. Edmond Chung, please.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's Edmund Chung from .Asia. We're actually a regional internet organization and a not-for-profit organization. We do run the .Asia domain, but we support internet development and adoption around Asia. So we are celebrating the 10 years this year, and in the last 10 years, one of the main areas that we have contributed to is youth engagement and development, and especially bringing a lot of young people to here at IGF. Many young people you see from Asia, from Hong Kong, and we're proud to say that we sparked a little bit of a youth internet governance forum movement in the last 10 years. But one of the things in commemoration of our 10-year anniversary this year is we commissioned a particular study on youth mobility, and this is a lot of the report. A lot of what I'm saying today will be coming from some of the research that we commissioned. So what we found, one of the things that young people care most about actually across Asia, their biggest concern is actually employment. With job obsolescence and AI and obviously automation and digitalization, all these kind of things, the jobs, nature of jobs, the actual jobs change, and that's a very worrisome thing. Natalia mentioned the book *Sapien*. I read it, very exciting. In fact, sign me up. I'd love to be one of the first useless class and go skiing every day rather than speaking here. But I think, unfortunately, or maybe some people could say fortunately, I think we still have jobs to be done into the future. And I'd like to, the way that I see it is more like as we look at learning machines, there's a job to co-learn with them. And one of the things that I think is important for preparing the young people into employment in the future is learning to learn, going back really to the basics. I think that's one of the basics of education was supposed to be learning to learn, but how to co-learn with machines is going to be one of the big challenges into the future, I think. And mobility of that, being able, and that's why Youth Mobility Index and that's why the Youth Mobility Study is how to be mobile, both in terms of physical, in terms of your social ability, but also in terms of knowledge and digital mobility, ability to move around online and ability to mobilize things online, including people and including machines. And I think that's one of the things that I see as being really important. Ultimately, some of the programs that Asia run is what we call empowerment, empowering youth. And in terms of empowerment, there are actually two components of it that people, I think, sometimes forget. One part of empowerment is to giving them knowledge and giving them the skills for the future, and to become useless and useful at the same time, I guess, into the future workforce. But the other part of empowerment is also providing a supportive environment. The environment has to change. The policies that are around today will need to change into the future in what I call a co-learning environment, where humans and machine learning machines work hand in hand. And at the heart of that empowerment is I guess the protection of people to be able to also challenge these machines as well. And I kind of will leave it at that. We'll come back to this, a lot of this. But I think, empowering young people to become useless and useful perhaps at the same time is probably something that we need to think about. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Edmond. And now is the turn of Ms. Ana Cristina Moroso, please.
Thank you very much, and good morning. So I'm Ana Cristina Neves from Portugal. I like this kind of discussion because on the same theme we can have different angles on the discussion. So I'm going to start with saying something that some of us don't like it so much, but the point here is that employment in the future or currently, maybe employment is not something that should worry us so much, since getting paid. Note that people working in the fields last century had the same concerns when the harvesters came. So these machines came to replace them. So people have always been able to do other things that are more valuable and not do the boring things machines did. It might be the same, even if it is not guaranteed that it's the same situation, because these machines are also smarter. On the other hand, normally, humans tend to live on a daily basis, and when they get a new technology, a new app, a mobile phone or a car without a driver, they just adapt, but do not think much about it. So we would need much more research and scientific production to advance faster. The current generation was born with smartphones, but the next one, in 10, 15, or 20 years, is sure to be born with something else. So maybe the smartphone is 10 years old, and I don't know if it will continue for how long it will last. So the current enthusiasm for technology also depends heavily on our ability to influence the future economy, because if you have young people who are familiar with the technologies, they will certainly create new products, new services, new content. So this is why digital competencies, and to invest on them, is more needed than ever. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ana Cristina. So now we're going to start with the question. The first question is, what are some... Because usted está so we have also the presentation of Mr. Dicho Bambo, the Foreign Service Officer, Ministry of External Relations, Cameroon.
It is an immense pleasure for me to be here today. We are talking about an era where very soon human beings will only need to breathe, because machines will be doing everything for us. But the perspective of Africa is one which we are facing a new revolution where Africa once again finds itself in the periphery, where the center seems to be doing everything and we are just watching. The question we are asking here is, where is the position of Africa in all of this industrial revolution that is coming up? We'll be looking at that and many others, and I hope before leaving this place, I'll be having an answer for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bamboo. Now, we have the first question. So is, what are some of the lessons learned from past market transformations? For example, agricultural to industrial, and how does digitization assist in making the most of the lessons, taking also into account the context of sharing economy? So who wants to start? Mr. Jennings, please.
Yeah, I think it's very important that we learn both the successes and failures of transformation and transition. This is not a new issue. We have seen the negligence afforded to people at times of local dislocation or industrial disruption and change has a very high cost. When we look at the Industrial Revolution, average age expectancy increased from 25 to 40 years old. At the time of the Industrial Revolution, children could work. Legislation was introduced in the early 1800s, which limited their working time to a wonderful 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. The human resources policy at that time was long and low, long hours and low pay. The lesson that we can learn from this is the need for, borrowing from the environmental world, a just transition. What does a just transition mean to people and communities when we're facing this level of disruption? So I would say for the conference itself, this notion of a just transition, that you accompany people in the process of change, is important in many different respects, from active labor market policies to your skills policy, your training policy, and also your social protection and social safety net. I think in this digital world of ours, dominated by the big six data companies, who are basically hyper-capitalist in their outlook and in their view on the world and in their business practices, repeating some of the monopolistic practices that we saw at the time of the Industrial Revolution and so criticized by Adam Smith. What we can say is we cannot leave it to the invisible hand of the market to deal adequately with the social transition and social investment required. We need a just transition. We need a global social deal to accompany people in this process of change. If we don't do it, the social costs, the economic costs, and I believe the political costs will be severe and once again will be a threat to peace and social cohesion.
Thank you, Mr. Jennings. And now is the turn of Mr. El Gamal, please.
Thank you very much. I fully agree with many of what Mr. Jennings was saying, and but in fact we can look at the both sides, and we can look at the benefits we are having currently, as well as the challenges we are facing. It is true that there are many challenges related to the shift of skills required to different work in the future or currently even. Also challenges related to legislation to handle different, as was said, regarding companies like Uber or else, where to position them and how to treat them. And is this labor a self-employed labor, or is it part of the company? We don't have local legislation with that regards, and we don't have international legislation with that regards, and those are challenges that we need to face as we go forward. In addition, of course, to the challenges related to privacy, cybercrime, data exchange, and all of that. But from the other perspective, I think we have many to appreciate in this digital revolution on the socio-economic front. I'll give some examples of what we are doing in Egypt, and I think that there are many other examples that needs to be shared. But simply, in part of, in fact, bridging the societal divide in Egypt, we use the data coming from all perspectives and analyze that and find ways to identify the least advantaged people or the most needing people on the ground, and provide them with specific opportunities of work depending on their own needs in the localized governorates. And this was not done before because we didn't have the opportunity to have that much amount of big data to be analyzed and to come with clear identification of the citizen requiring specific needs, skills, or training, or specific job style. Having a labor portal is bringing more transparency and governance to the providing labor opportunity all over the country for more than 100 million people. Along with that, we started initiatives. We have a presidential initiative to create the next technology leaders. Why? Because we have identified the challenge mentioned, where now while it is clear that there is a shift in the skills required more towards technology, we have lack of that. In fact, there is an additional point where when we create those type of technology leaders, we face immigration, and then we lose them again, and we start all over again. And this is something that we are handling now by creating a sort of smart environment in different governorates in order to attract investments and then being able to keep the skilled laborers technologically enabled in those areas. In fact, there is also in UAE a very good initiative called Million Arab Coders. And this is very important to be able to generate in the Arab world the amount of required technology people that would be able to help us bridging that gap that we were talking about. Part of what is good about what we have currently is it is providing additional woman empowerment, certainly in rural areas. While it is still in an early stage, but in fact, some of the women that do not want to leave their village or even work from home are more capable now of being productive using technology. One thing that is very important, that is even driving all the phenomena forward, is focusing on the financial inclusion, because the more we have mandate of have no more cash moving around, but more cashless economy, and the more we are going into this is fighting corruption first of all, but also engaging more and more from every perspective, citizen, private sector, government, into technology-oriented communication and transactions. And there are many others, while still there are many challenges to be handled. And the more we are discussing them, the more we may arrive to find the opportunity to handle those type of challenges. But just to increase one more thing is, and we were discussing that also, among other things, by analyzing the information that we have, and as part of the automation part, we are analyzing how many production lines and what type of machines we have, so that we are able to raise the capability of our youth to be able to automate further those production lines and put more AI, artificial intelligence, into these in order to increase the value proposition that we are having. And this would help a lot the developing countries to move into more developed countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gamal. Anyone else who wants to answer this question? Okay, Mr. Chan, please.
Hi, Edmund Chung here. So, building on what Mr. Jennings just mentioned, and I fully agree, this is one of the very important lessons to learn as we moved from agricultural age to industrial age. We knew that we learned that worker welfare and those kind of things are very important for a healthy society. But at the same time, as we think about the issue now, we need to think about it probably differently. It's a different type of transition. Yes, we want all those things, but it is a different type of transition that we're talking about here. And if you look at it, it really need to think about, I think, what we call a paradigm shift. We shifted from kind of like a family and tribal paradigm to a machine paradigm in the industrial age. What we call machine paradigm is that we are each a cog in the big machinery, and there's limbs and this big head that is the central processing power. But in the new paradigm, we're seeing a big paradigm shift right now in terms of concept, is we're in the network paradigm. No longer do we have a central brain to think. We are all peers in terms of peer nodes on the network. So understanding the environment and what we're going to, as we think about automation, is not just, in the past when we think about worker welfare, we think about understanding machines and understanding capital and how they work. But now we need to understand AI. We need to understand those algorithms, and we need to understand those biases that are behind those algorithms, and also understand the networks, the network effects of things. So, there are people who say that we don't even know what the algorithms are work, and therefore that's just how it works. And that, I think, is a little bit of a bogus, because even though when you put a lot of systems together, there may be uncertainties of how, what gets churned out at the end of that process. However, the intentions, the biases, the assumptions that the programmers created in the first place, no matter how the machine learns, is still there. And we need to learn to co-learn. Again, going back to, we need to learn to co-learn with those machines, and our policies needs to give us the protection and the environment to challenge those machines and challenge those algorithms, and therefore we need a way to audit those algorithms. So I think, before we jump into how we can protect workers and provide the benefits, we need to understand how the machines work, and now is the time to create those protection mechanisms so that the people can actually go in and audit and understand those machines. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sean. So we don't have more time to continue answer this first question. So, okay. So we have more minutes to Miss Karen or okay, Miss Valentina. Sorry.
Yes. So it has been discussed also with my fellow colleagues here that the automation and the disruption has been already there in history, already with the agricultural revolution, but also, of course, with the industrial revolution even much more. But precisely as the Portuguese colleague was saying before, I think what's more threatening now is that these machines are intelligent, differently from the previous one, the previous automation. So that is why, yes, I agree that digital skills are fundamental, not only in learning how to use ICTs, but also how to influence ICTs. So coding skills, coding training course, precisely to make it, as Lawrence Lessing used to say, the code is the law, then the code must be also ethical, must have an ethical law. So the algorithm must be ethical, and we need to teach people how to influence, precisely how to design a more ethical algorithms and code for the law, and more ethical ICT for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Valentina. So now, it's the turn of the second question, and are there tools that can better measure and predict the impact of ICT on the labor market? Are there tools that can predict what skills are needed going forward? Who wants to start? Mr. El Gamal, yeah.
Well, as I just was saying, this is something already we are implementing, and we are a developing country, so certainly many developed countries already implement similar. The fact that digitization is providing a huge amount of data to analyze is giving us the opportunity to identify clearly the potential and the needs, and accordingly, and with collaboration with many intergovernmental organizations and other government authority, we are able to make clearly the development maps, the digital development maps of the country, and with that we come with the industry labor required maps. And we discuss it and we put it towards two things, towards the labor market itself, and the other thing is we put it towards the Ministry of Education to cater for the so that the education would fit with the required needs of the labor market that is in there. And accordingly as well, we identify the gaps of the skills required to that market according to those maps that identify what is required, but also what is planned through the government 5 years plan, again fitting the SDGs 2030. So by doing that, we are able to identify the gaps required, putting the necessary curriculum into the education cycle, and also put capacity building for the people and for the ongoing education for the ones that are already in the market field. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. El Gamal. So, Ms. Neves, please.
Okay, so I just would like to add for this discussion that maybe in 10 years, machines with artificial intelligence, digital minds, are going to do some things that are now done by humans, like perhaps driving cars. But there are other things too, like examining diplomas or counseling. In 50 years, I think it's even it's much more harder to see where we'll be, as a lot happens in 50 years. But we have to be at least aware of the digital transformation, and this involves necessarily action to measure where we are and what we want to achieve. In this context, Portugal launched an initiative that I think it's very interesting. It is called Mccabe 2030. So it's an initiative that has 5 pillars. One is digital inclusion, the second one is education, the third one is qualification, requalification, the fourth is advanced specialization, and the fifth is research. So normally we have this kind of initiatives, programs that normally go to from digital inclusion till qualification and education. This one, it's different because it involves specialization and new knowledge. So this is very important in the current world, because in 50 years it will be a totally different world. We don't know. It's totally difficult and impossible to know what will happen. But we dare to think to 2030. And there are some countries that are thinking about 2050. And why? Because there is a need to accompany all this evolution and to be aware. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Amoroso. Now is the turn, please, of Mr. Chang, please.
Edmund Chung here. So, yeah, building on in terms of in terms of prediction, I think it's safe to say that most predictions are going to be wrong. So the tools, whatever you do, I mean, they're the famous prediction from IBM that there are only a world market for 5 computers or something, and Bill Gates said something like 64K is the maximum memory we need. So but learning from that, we know that we need to also know that AI or whatever tool we do in terms of prediction is probably could have a big error, a potential error as well, and the uncertainty. But speaking of that, actually, in terms of tools of measuring, I guess, the readiness of young people and the environment for young people to thrive into the future, that's what I mentioned in terms of earlier, the Youth Mobility Index that we have created. We're launching it early next year, and then we're inviting everyone to join and to refine it over time. And it looks at the different environmental issues as environment as in terms of the sector, in terms of employment and education and entrepreneurship, and especially on digital mobility, how people, how young people can move around online and also mobilize people online. That's going to be, I think, a good predictor of the future workforce and future of a competitive advantage of localities and countries.
Thank you, Mr. Chung. Next is Mr. Jennings, please.
Yeah, I would kind of turn the question the other way, and I would suggest that the forum, in its conclusions, would also put in some other benchmarks for governments to follow. For example, how much do they invest in the human capital of their nation, and what has been the evolution of this over a period of time? Our understanding is, when we look at the figures, that there is a chronic underinvestment in people, in their skills development, not just from school to work transition, but also during the course of their working lives. At the same time, it would be really interesting to look at the level of investment in active labor market policies. If you look at some of the leading countries in the world, economically leading, for example, the United States of America spends 0.1% of its GDP on active labor market policies, where those countries which are further up the competitive league are spending closer to 2 or between 1 and 2%. There is a chronic underinvestment in active labor market policies. And also to look at the bottom-up approach. I know in the UK now we have tens of thousands. They used to be called shop stewards. You talked about us adapting our structures. We now have people on the shop floor. They're not shop stewards anymore. They're training representatives. That means that every worker can go to that union representative. It's elected. It's a fellow worker. And together they can discuss the training needs of the individual to make sure that those skills are adapted and developed. And I would say in the metrics and in terms of the data, this is also a very useful and productive way of ensuring that that lonely voice on the shop floor is being listened to and the skills being developed. The point is, I think that in face of this revolution, we are not prepared, and there's a chronic underinvestment in the human capital of this planet.
Thank you, Mr. Jennings. And now is the turn of Ms. Karen, please.
Thank you. I'd like to build on a little bit about what Mr. Jennings has noted, because you did mention GDP, and sort of the human-centric factors around this. Technical innovation comes often with transformation of jobs, as we've been witnessing. And one can say, actually, the purpose of various forms of automation was historically to increase productivity and to reduce human labor. Whereas it's rather straightforward to identify maybe what tasks can be automated, it's quite difficult to imagine the new jobs that will be created, as we have been discussing this week in many other fora. However, this time, the industry and service sectors that are impacted are much wider than in the past because of digitization and because it's pervasive. It also requires much less investment, and it's easy to share. It's also global and can easily disrupt governmental regulations, and it's progressing really, really fast. However, there's also a very important issue that we see. Because they are pervasive, these technologies also provide a unique opportunity to actually address human needs and to increase well-being. You know, traditional measures of economic growth are based on GDP. If we move beyond this to measure the impact of intelligent systems technologies on society through increase of well-being, we may be able to invent new applications and create new markets and jobs that target well-being. For example, components of well-being, such as those considered by OECD, could largely benefit from intelligent systems creating new jobs and markets, such as in the fields of health, civil engagement, environmental quality, and education. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Karen.
Well, since we are running out of time, I will propose doing the following. Since you have had access to the other 3 questions, I'm going to summarize those questions, and then we can have a quick round to address all of them, and then wrap up. So the next questions will be, what are the ways in which the labor market will most likely be affected by digitization and automation? What policies should be considered in an environment of increasing demographics in developing countries? And the other one, what would be the necessary professional skills to take advantage of the jobs created in a highly digital society, and what examples of innovative approaches to training by which workers can be done more effectively, connected to more opportunities? And then the last one relates to how can education and capacity development play a role in this new scenario, and what kind of efforts will be necessary for public and private stakeholders to promote the education and capacity development in both developed and developing countries. So these are the last questions, and then we'll have a quick last round and then wrap up. Thank you. Who would like to start? Please, Mr. Chong.
Edmund here. So I guess I'll take on just the last part of it. From .Asia, we have been engaged in, I guess, a little bit of education from primary, secondary to university students in the last little while. One of the things that is important, I think, especially with automation and the future that we see, is we need to de-emphasize the information, kind of information-intensive education that we have today. The curriculum needs to change, not only just about flipping the classroom and those kind of things, but the actual learning process. What people, what we teach our younger people is going to be, and the format for that is going to be important. One of the things that we are experimenting in the coming year, especially in our sessions at Net Mission, we're gonna not only ask them to introduce the subject because they can look at all the information online, but as we ask speakers to go through the material, we're gonna ask as the speaker speaks, we're gonna ask the students to, or the participants, to actually actively search for stuff online. So in the past, as a teacher or as a professor, you don't want people, fiddling with their laptop or mobile at all, right? But we're going to try to experiment to actively ask them to search for things and challenge the speaker over, during the course of the actual training process. So we're going to try to see that. And one of this is not just a matter of format. It's also tying back to what I was mentioning earlier. We need to have an environment that allows humans to challenge future AI. And this is going to be a learning process in terms of challenging authority, but also learning as people speak and as things go forward. So we hopefully next year we can report back how successful or how disastrous it was. But I think that the different types of format of education is going to be important for younger people in the new world that we're seeing with AI.
Who would like to be the next? Mr. Gamal, please.
Once again, with regarding to those are the three questions. I'll try. I don't remember all of them now, but part of them is related to preparing for the market. And I just want to say something that I do not believe that the digitization will hurt the classic labor. In fact, what we have seen somehow in some of the experience of service provision, like delivery services or Uber-like services, is that there was much more employment of people that needed employment and was not having this opportunity aside of their job or aside of their education, etc. And in many of the developing countries, it was really of an added value for thousands of people. Now, what we need to do, we need certainly to put clearly clear curriculum to prepare people properly to go for the industry revolution 4.0, and whether it is for 2030 or 2050, it still will be capitalizing on artificial intelligence, digitization, and digitally enabled equipment. And for that, the fact that everybody, we in Egypt have 103% penetration, mobile penetration. And I think in many countries it's the same. And accordingly, maybe this is what was said by Mr. Shung, is that we are already mobile. We are already connected. We have already access. What is remaining is how to enable us to use this mobility and access to deliver service or good or mainly value. And once we are able to deliver better value, we are able to generate revenue to the country and to the individual, to the citizen in all cases. The challenges that we are facing really would remain to be the legislations, to organize properly the interaction between different stakeholders, to identify properly through this disruptive change how we cater for Uber-like services, put it under transportation or under technology. How can we make sure that labor working for such companies are protected? At the same time, there is enough incentive for such investment to take place and for such service to be provided. Along with that, building trust, because digitization is facing a big challenge of trust. During this whole forum, all of what we were talking about was false news and manipulated information. So again, going more into digitization, whether automation, digital trade, digital exchange of information, if for any reason we face more false news or manipulated information, this would uncredit the system. So we need to find ways and legislation that would balance between the expansion required for the digitization and maintaining governance at the same time. Thank you.
Mr. Jennings, please.
Yeah, an omnibus answer to the three questions. First of all, I would suggest that if governments already haven't done so, they should establish their own future of work commissions with the question, are we prepared? The International Labour Office, to celebrate its centenary, has a future of work commission in place, which is expected to report by the beginning of their centenary year in 2019. I know a number of governments have done this around the world, but they are few in number. So I would say, in response, that this is mission critical for good governance of a nation to establish your future of work commissions with the question, are we prepared? Secondly, I think we have to have the courage here to talk about the ethics of the big data companies, the big six, in terms of, in various terms, in terms of competition policy, in terms of their rather loose-handed, quick-footed approach to taxation matters, and also with respect to the voice of working people within their structures. Mr. Chung, you referred to the fact that we're in a modern paradigm, but I can tell you, some of the union busting that we see, the resistance to union organization that we see, belongs to another age. And if you're working in an Amazon warehouse and you compare those kinds of conditions to the Charlie Chaplin modern times production line, which we would say is no laughing matter, by the way, then you will find very similar issues in place. We are seeing the commoditization of labor. And I realize your point about this new world, this peer world, this network world. And then you move into the world of Amazon Turk, where you see casualization. This is the same labor policies that dock workers in my hometown, Cardiff, had to suffer. Herded into a shed where the foreman picked and chose who they wanted and when, and decided the wages accordingly. So there are other downsides to the labor market that we need to look at. And therefore, I would ask governments as well to begin to say, in our quest for a decent life for our citizens, can we come up with a sense of what is good work? What is an acceptable form of work that we're prepared to encourage, to invest in, and promote? And then to develop the benchmarks around this in terms of what is the quality of our workforce, what is the quality of life that workforce can enjoy, and how are we preparing them for the future. And I agree with you on artificial intelligence and the rather tempting suggestions that you have made. We have produced, as a global union, 10 principles for artificial intelligence, sort of basic stuff, really, but what we're trying to do is to turn this new human resources tool, management tool, economic tool, business tool, into a place where there should be a conversation about the bias, about its impact, about the privacy involved, and also what it means in that new place of work where you basically have no say. And I think, therefore, in trying to prepare for this new future, these are ideas which I think are workable, which should be invested in, and will at least give the sense to people out there that they're being accompanied on this journey of change.
I would like to ask every speaker to give a quick 1-minute intervention summarizing the conversation and the main points you would like to highlight. Thank you. Who would like to start? Yeah, please.
Okay, Samuel, here again. One thing is certain that the classical labor market will be altered, and we need laws that need to get everybody on board to regulate the way the digitalization process is going to take place in the nearest future. Because without a harmonized legal system, we will have countries that are very well advanced and others who will be lagging behind. And this, I think, is the responsibility of the government. Coming back to the curriculum, the trainings, it is very difficult for me as a Cameroonian and to identify actually where we need to direct our capacity building, because in as much as we are investing in trying to train the Cameroonian youth, in trying to train the African youth in order to adapt to these rapid changes, we have discovered that the technological changes are actually far ahead of us, because the things that the changes that we are seeing today, we did not envisage these changes 10 years back. And the question I'm asking now is, which direction do you think we should be training our youth? Because actually, we were thinking that training youths in how to handle maybe drones to do a delivery, door-to-door delivery. We discovered that some of these drones now are operating without even human intervention. And it is scary because at a certain point in time, we will be found lagging at the very end. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bambo. I would like to open the floor for a very quick, short summary at 30 seconds each, because we are running out of time. Thank you. Would you like to start, Mr. Jennings?
Start the clock again. Clearly, there are many opportunities. There are many exciting opportunities. We see a dawn of a new way of doing things, of communicating and bringing new meaning to our civilization. But at the same time, there are risks. We cannot leave this to the market. We can't leave this to the big six. The voice of the people has to be heard. We want a community of nations where people are not left behind, where we think in terms of people and planet and sustainability. It is important that people have a say. The application of the invisible hand of the market will not bring social cohesion. I think the cohesion of our communities is at risk. When we see some of the predictions which are made in terms of consequences on jobs, then this drives a very hard shaft through any sense of hope or optimism that people can have unless they are accompanied. My appeal to the conference and to decision makers everywhere is a Future of Work Commission with the principle, be prepared and do not leave people behind.
Thank you, Mr. Jennings. Would you like to do the next one? Okay, thank you.
I think, and you hear a common thread coming through. There's great promise with the technologies that we have and that will be developed, but that great promise is intersecting, if you will, with trust. And how do we reap the benefits of the technology if there's going to be an increasing lack of trust in that technology? And not only the technology, but the companies, the organizations that are developing it and deploying it. You know, I do think it takes a collective, and it's very difficult to get all voices heard, but we have to start. I think a forum and a venue like IGF provides that great opportunity to start taking a deeper dive into some of those issues. But in addition to discussing those issues, hopefully will emerge are some practical solutions that can be tested, that can be prototyped, and that can be applicable to certain parts of the world. And then we can learn from them, and hopefully we can start to see progress in how we are going to address the fear that might be out there when it comes to jobs because of technology, specifically related to this panel. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to just request that we are brief. I will give the floor to Mr. Chung.
So I think, in summary, I think everyone agrees that change is imminent, and in fact, we are not quite prepared. I think from most of the speakers, but also we shouldn't throw away what we learned in the last transition. You know, protecting the workers, protecting the people is important. And I want to bring out just one item from the spirit of the internet, which is called permissionless innovation. Yes, we want to keep that. However, permissionless innovation doesn't mean free for all forever. As Mr. Jennings said, you know, as the big six rolls on, there is time that we need to rein them back and to provide the protection and the support for our workers to make it make sense for the social. When they have a social impact on people's lives, we need to have policies and even, you know, big R word regulations in place to protect the people. So permissionless innovation, but also we need processes to protect workers and people.
Thank you. Yes.
Okay, one thing is certain that new technologies are eliminating differences between the physical, the digital, and the biological worlds in which we are living today. And the weak will be crushed in the nearest future. One thing I want us to bear in mind, and one thing we should always bear in mind while going through the new development process, is that we should put human beings first. We should not become inhuman in our quest for development. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Neves.
Thank you. Digital inclusion, updated teachers at schools with these new digital worlds, and the promotion of more research for the creation of new knowledge will be key, not in 5 years, but for the next year. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gamal, please.
Well, it was a pleasure, first of all. Thank you very much. I would agree on one thing, that is that what was happening, what is happening, what will be happening is turning everything to citizen-centric, which is very good. In all cases, it is very good. We will face challenges going that path, but it is becoming citizen-centric. It is certain that having the idea of Future of Work Commission is a great idea that we have to consider and take it forward as governments. But also we need to look at things, because there are benefits that are happening, there are many challenges, and if we look back 10 years ago, or in Tunisia, when first IGF took place, many challenges were there as well, and a lot of progress took place, and new challenges happened. So I think by identifying the challenges properly and agreeing to work together on it, we certainly step by step be able to solve those. I think that it is very important to have a close multi-stakeholder collaboration on this. This is the only way we can move forward with that. I think that we need always to maintain the 2030 SDGs, because we all countries agreed on this, so it will be easier to find common paths to move forward on this. I think that many important basic challenges that we need to handle from legislation perspective related to privacy, trust, and cybersecurity before going really forward on artificial intelligence and other points. Finally, and for the last thing, I invite you to look at one of the experiments that we have done in Egypt called e-Knowledge Bank. And e-Knowledge Bank is a unique experience where we went into contracting with, I think, 32 of the famous publishers in the world in order to provide knowledge, electronic knowledge, to all Egyptians, to the 100 million Egyptians, free of charge, in order to help bridging the digital divide. And in addition, we are providing from those same publishers the researches, the latest state of researches everywhere for researchers in Egypt to be able to prepare better for their PhD and post-PhD research as well. And by this, we are trying to close the social divide and the digital divide. This is just one initiative, and I hope many will come as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gamal. For the purpose of the transcript here, my name is Natalia Fodic. Paola Perez was my colleague here. I guess, Mr. Bambo had mentioned that he wanted to leave this session with answers. I myself have more questions than answers. However, I could see that we addressed so many of the issues that were addressed in every single session in this IGF, such as AI, big data, gender, privacy, trust, algorithmic fairness, cybersecurity. So they're all interrelated to this question too, to this panel too. I could perceive from the panelists that there is this question on whether the new changes and challenges are comparable or not to what we had in the past, and to what extent, right? Because if you have AI and machine learning, these new concepts bring new challenges, and the commoditization of labor might be happening again and bringing us to, I quote Mr. Jennings, Charlie Chaplin labor time. Also, I could see that there's a real need to talk about labor policies and understand like the institutional issues and governmental needs, so that we are actually ready to address all these questions, and that we have an interoperable legal system to address those questions. Lastly, fairness and discrimination seems to be also a pervasive topic in all these questions addressed here, because we will need the real skills not only for the job itself, but also for accountability of the systems that are going to be implementing a lot of these changes. So I guess, this is a real brief summary of the session, and I would like to give the floor to my colleague Renata Aquino, who is going to do some final remarks.
Thank you, Natalia. Thank you for all the participants of the session and our panelists. This was a twofold purpose session. In the first part, we discussed a lot about trade and cross-border data flows, and the idea of data localization, and how could all stakeholders deal with the barriers we currently have to create cross-border data flows and trade in an efficient, human, and respectful way to potentialize the digital economy. In the second part of the session, we have seen more in detail how can policies created by specific initiatives, such as initiatives regarding education, science, and technology, initiatives that put first the people in a certain region, that look into regional economy and how it relates to the global perspective, the point of view also of permissionless innovation and the value this has for the digital economy, the idea that also the technical community will invest in innovation and in new emerging technologies as solutions to the problems we have in the digital economy today, and first and foremost, the idea that we have to do all this humanly, ethically, that we may be fooled by perspectives of time, that we have a new labor completely unregulated and successful in the sense that it creates a new economy that promotes only economical gains for the worker, which is not really the truth. We are seeing more and more that there are conflicts, there are issues that need to be sorted out with the impact of the sharing economy, the new digital economy. So thank you very much again, all our panelists, for this amazing session. I would like to thank my colleague Kenta Moshikuzi, Meg from Japan, and the Meg members have all given invaluable input for this session and helped us build it in a very challenging last day of the IGF. but looking forward for your participation as well on the closing ceremony and the taking stock. Thank you all. Please stay for a picture, panelists.